I remember when the war started, Michael McFaul said that this is the Putin's war. And today we cannot it's obvious what's going on in the society, within the society in Russia. The people are even more, you know, they want to be more forceful toward what's going on in Ukraine in terms of, against the West. You see somehow the Russian president, trying to do something in the middle. He's not going that far, confronting, NATO and the collective West. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Y- How do you see, Larry, what has happened to the Russian society? Because you remember when the war started, the media has convinced that some young Russian, you know, uh, boys to get out of Russia, not stay there and fighting for Russia because that was Putin's war, that was a war of aggression. That is not the case anymore, even with the more liberal part of the society.
Um, Look, I've only been to Russia times in the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
lot.
yeah. So
You know a lot
now,
then.
what do I know? Um, what I have not observed protests against the war. I have not heard, meeting with. I've met with a variety of people. I'm not just locked into one group. Um, the actually the issue of the war doesn't really come up much because it's not a war. It's a special military operation right now. That's how the society is organized, and what that means is that the average consumer, the average Russian, is not having to make a sacrifice to forego, food or to be limited with coupons for buying gas. You go back to what happened in the United States during World War II. Uh, Nobody could buy a new car for like 3 or 4 years. No new cars. Um, they were limited. You got ration coupons for how much gas you could buy. There are restrictions. You don't see that in Russia. Now you're correct. There are some segments of Russian society that want Putin to really take the gloves off and just beat the living hell out of Ukraine. And you've heard that articulated sometimes by the likes of Medvedev, the former Russian president. But the, there is not this surge of I guess anger or irritation that they're saying, okay, we got to move quicker. Um, Putin is relying upon the general staff for the war plan, how they're proceeding with the war. And, do they make mistakes? Yes, they've made mistakes. I'm not at all arguing that the Russian military is perfect, but, they seem to be handling business pretty well. And they have proceeded. I've not been privy to their plans. So I have to assume they know what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. Um, as I've said before, one of the things that has been a limiting factor on the performance of the Russian military was because it's not a war, because they did not mobilize on a wartime footing. They've relied on a slower process for building up the actual number of men in the army. And that has, as that number has risen, their operations and activities have increased. That's why this year we're seeing, far more rapid advances than any time in the previous 3 years. And I think that's only going to continue. It's not going to subside.
I think that shows how the Russian army has been transforming, somehow a defensive army. They were prepared to defend themselves, but they were not prepared to attack any other, to go outside of Russia to fight, something like NATO,
Well,
700,000 soldiers in Ukraine. They were fighting a huge force in Ukraine. But as you've mentioned, it shows how they have been trained. They have been training during the process of war in Ukraine. And Russia today is totally, their army is totally different,
Well,
Larry.
yeah,
I don't know if go ahead. Go
well,
ahead. Go ahead.
I lost you were talking and your voice disappeared.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about the transformation of the Russian
Yeah,
army.
well, when the special military operation started in February 2022, the Russian ground forces were estimated at 275,000 total, and they only deployed about half of that into um, the initial incursion into Ukraine. They had a reserves at the time, uh, I want to say 800, 900,000, or, ready reserves. Um, but actually, the numbers, I guess they, in theory, could have called upon 3 to 5 million. Well, they didn't do that. By September 2022, they mobilized 320,000. Uh, Now, here we are coming up on the fourth year of this war. Their army has grown to around 1.5 million. So it's increased by a factor of, um, you know, almost 7 times the size of what it was 4 years ago. Now, d- bringing people in means you don't just immediately, like the Ukrainians are doing, put a uniform on them, shove them to the front lines. The Russians do have the luxury of time to train these people. In fact, I was just reading that one of the problems they've got right now is they've got so many people wanting to sign up, wanting to enlist, they don't have enough training grounds available, enough bases where they could absorb all those new trainees. So, Russia's not suffering, they're not suffering losses in manpower, they're not suffering losses in terms of their ability to produce weapons, they're not suffering losses in terms of shortages of energy. So, everything, basically everything you need in order to fight and sustain a war, Russia has, and Ukraine doesn't. That is, that's the fundamental issue. If you think about it, you say, okay, what do we need? Okay, we need manpower, people willing to fight. Russia has that. Ukraine doesn't. We see video after video of Ukrainian, recruiters going out and tackling people and dragging them into cars. Um, you need to have an industrial base that can provide what you need for the war effort. Russia has that, and they haven't even had to go onto a war footing. In other words, what exists within the civilian economy is still sufficient to keep them supplied with weapons and ammunition and new vehicles, new tanks, new planes, etc. The people have to be willing to support the war effort. Um, you have that in Russia. It's questionable how far that extends in Ukraine. Uh, there's uh, there are some reports that the people still believe that they can win this war. You know, so they're victims of their own propaganda. Um, Russia has all of the factors you need in order to sustain the war effort. Ukraine, without Western support, does not. It's that simple.
On the part of NATO, how did you find, Larry, all these weapons, different type of weapons going Ukraine? It shows something, the weapons are not integrated into the system that was exposed in Ukraine and somehow. I don't know if that's of concern for NATO.
Well, again, um, when Russia builds weapons, they are built in, I guess, according to let's call it a national security strategy. They actually do have a genuine national security strategy, and the the whole military industrial system in Russia is not a capitalist system. It's not one where these industries exist in order to earn profits for shareholders. Uh, these industries exist to make sure that Russia has what it needs to fend off foreign attacks. It has been the philosophy behind it. Whereas when you get into the West, the various companies that build tanks and planes and cannons, artillery pieces and artillery shells, these are all capitalist companies. They're not they're publicly owned, or they serve shareholders, and those shareholders want returns. So the weapons that are end up being designed, developed, and deployed are not necessarily weapons that serve a national security strategy. And then because of how NATO is with 31 countries now, the industry in Germany does things in one way, the industry in France does things in another way, and the same with the UK. So there's no coherent focus, uh, and it's not like they're all producing something um, to a particular standard. They have different standards, different capabilities. So it's just this uh, Europe. Europe is not in the position that let's go back to 1930 as Hitler comes to power and Hitler starts rebuilding the German army. Uh, they had, at the time in Germany, they had idle factories. They had workers that were looking for a job. Um, today in Germany, they've got a problem with energy. They can't you know they can't produce. They're shuttering factories, and a lot of those factories are moving overseas. So they don't right now have the capability in place to produce on a footing that would really build up the army in a dramatic fashion. And frankly, Russia's monitoring that too. Russia's not going to sit back and allow these countries uh, to rearm on the scale of like what Germany did in the 1930s, because the Russians are legitimately concerned that Europe keeps talking about attacking Russia. They keep treating Russia as if it's an enemy.
Without arms, they're talking about preemptive attacks on Russia. So
Yeah,
just
yeah,
imagine
yeah.
if they produce uh, new arms. But Larry, let me shift the gear a little bit to what's going on with the meeting, with the upcoming meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. It's in
Hmm.
Washington Post reported that Netanyahu is going to press U.S. president during the meeting, and because he wants to attack Iran.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you saw so I wrote a piece 2 days ago based on a headline in the New York Post where it said, Iran declares war on the United States, Israel, and Europe. And I went, hey, that's unusual. Then you actually read the article. It was Pezeshkian was being interviewed. I forget which media outlet, but he said, "Look, we're effectively at war with Israel, the United States, and the West. We're not looking for a fight, but they're attacking us." He was simply acknowledging the situation. But instead, here's the New York Post, which has been carrying a lot of water for the Zionists, saying, "Oh, see, those Iranians, they're declaring war on us, so we got to be able to go attack them." So I mean, this was put out, 2 days before, this was done on Saturday. So, Netanyahu arrives today. And I'm sure Netanyahu's going to do his best to try to convince Trump, yeah, we need to go take another whack at those Iranians. They're serious about it, and the New York Post was being used, I think, by Zionist sources because the publishers of that newspaper, they're very close with the Israelis, and they carry water for Israeli propaganda. So yeah, they're trying to uh, create the impetus uh, to see if they can get Trump on board. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump will tell Netanyahu, okay, yeah, we'll see what we can do, and that they will try at some point to try to attack Iran again. Only this time, I think Iran is ready in a way that it was not last June.
And you feel it, you see it when you're here in Iran. And I don't know, Larry, when it comes to, they were talking about the Iran's nuclear program. Right now, they're talking about missile
Right,
facilities.
right.
So this is so ridiculous how far they would go, because that's impossible. I would say, Larry, here you see in the media talking with officials, you cannot believe that anything of what Netanyahu is asking for would happen anytime soon. If they go that far, we're going to have a full out war between the
Yeah,
two.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's why Iran, after the attack, the 12-day war, was it June 13th to June 25th, uh, sat down and realized, you know what, we need to look at our relationships with Russia and China in a new light. Previously, Iran resisted um, getting too far embedded militarily with either Russia or China, but not now. I've been jokingly referring to how they're racking up frequent flyer miles, all the Iranian officials that keep traveling back and forth to Moscow and to Beijing. And it's not it's people from the foreign ministry, people from the Ministry of Defense. Uh, it's not just one or two meetings. It's there's frequent contact. So Iran now is militarily, economically, and politically in a much stronger position than it was on June 12th of 2025. And if Israel is stupid enough to try to go ahead and attack Iran, thinking that they're going to defeat Iran and force a collapse of society, they may actually end up doing the same to themselves, because I think Iran is in a much stronger position now to retaliate.
And in you follow the Israeli media, they're talking about what would happen in the aftermath of Netanyahu's, administration. It seems that Netanyahu is gonna be, somehow. I don't know how possible is that to have someone in Israel replacing Netanyahu, because after all, and how influential that would be considering the foreign policy of Israel.
Well, I don't see any. They get rid of Netanyahu. He's he is gifted in terms of knowing how to manipulate U.S. Opinion, and then to get the support from the United States. But um, in terms of the policies he's pursuing, he's there's a majority of Israelis that support this. So it's not like a Netanyahu's pushing a policy that the majority of the Israelis reject. It's just the opposite. They embrace it. They just don't like Netanyahu personally, and he is corrupt. But Netanyahu goes. There's still. I don't see Israel changing course at all.
But after all, you remember the 12 days of war, which was so, short. Many people getting out of Israel, which wasn't the case, by the way, here in Iran. And
Well, right.
so a country of the size of 80, 90, 91 million people, they're not leaving the country. They're somehow unifying from within. And you see in Israel, people getting out, to Cyprus, other countries. So, it doesn't
Yeah. Well,
make sense
I'm
to me.
not sure how much. There were a number that left around that period. I don't know if any have come back, or if they continue to abandon Israel. Um, the threat of war does, I think, may be an incentive for some. The problem is you got these settlers that they continue to try to steal land from the Palestinians, and The latest action over the last month, the government of Israel has authorized and approved more theft, and so um, the you know they're like a ravenous locust. They keep consuming, destroying. Uh, and unfortunately for the Palestinians, while they get some lip service from a lot of countries, there has been no concerted international action to try to stop Israel.